You see it. Let's get it. Government exposed by old Android phones. Government's cheap. They need to upgrade those phones. So, once again, let's look at the article and break it down. U.S. government employees exposed to mobile attacks from outdated Androids and iOS. According to the new report, almost half of Android based mobile phones used by the U.S. state and local government employees are running outdated versions of an operating system, exposing them to hundreds of vulnerabilities that can be leveraged for attacks. The statistics come from a report by the cybersecurity firm Lookout based on analysis of 200 million devices and 175 million applications from 2021 to H2 2022. All right, so wow, that's a lot of devices. Reports additionally warns in the rise of all threat metrics, including attempting phishing attacks against government employees, relying on unmanaged mobile devices, and liability points in mission critical networks. The outdated version of mobile operating system allow attackers to exploit vulnerabilities that can be used to breach targets, run code on devices, plant spyware, steal credentials, and much, much more. For example, last week Apple released iOS 16.1, fixing actively exploited zero-day memory corruption flaws used by hackers against iPhone users to achieve arbitrary code execution with kernel privileges. Yeah, so man, that's good. When you have a 0 day, that means there's nothing out there that's gonna catch it, right? The Lookout reports that 10 months after the OS 15 had been made available to users, 5% of the federal government employees had updated. Only 30% of state and local government devices were running older versions of the operating system, right? 5% of federal government and 30% of state and local devices were running older versions still of the operating system. The situation is much worse for Androids, as 10 months after the release of version 12, approximately 30% of the federal devices and 50% of state and local devices are still needing to be upgraded to the latest version, thus remaining vulnerable to bugs that can be exploited in an attack. It also should be noted that Android 13 is the latest version of the operating system, but it was released first half of 2020, which this data was collected. So Android's 10 months after the Android release, OS 12, 67% of feds, 11, 14, 10 still 6, 9, and wow, 8. So they got to get out there and get those upgraded, right? They should force them to upgrade. Notably, 10.7 of the federal government and only 17 of the state and local governments devices were running Android 8 and 9, which reached end of life support in November 2021 and March 2022, respectively. Meaning they're definitely not going to do any security updates or backport anything. The 2S versions carry over 2,000 known vulnerabilities that Google will not fix, and the list only gets longer each month. Wow, 2,000 known vulnerabilities. The mobile attacks rising. According to Lockout, the most common attack against mobile users is malware delivery, accounting for 75%, while credential harvesting represents most of the remaining percentage of that. While commodity malware usually infects Android mobile devices using fake apps, advanced spyware known as zero-day vulnerabilities and target attacks against journalists, politicians, and activists. The analyst says when comparing year over year stats, malware distribution is gradually dropping and credential theft attacks are gradually increasing. In 2022, 1 out of 11 government employees monitored by Lockout were targeted by phishing attacks, with both managed and unmanaged devices having roughly the same targeting rate. Of those who clicked on the malicious link were warned, about 57% did not repeat the mistake, 19% clicked again, and 24% clicked over 3 times. So they do phishing tests to see, if their training's going well. So they keep track of those metrics. To aid in securing devices, the U.S. Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency (CISA) has created a known exploited vulnerability catalog that contains a list of vulnerabilities actively exploited in attacks and deadlines by which federal agencies must patch. However, where CISA advised state, local, and tribal governments to follow the same guidelines, they are not required to do so under the directive. Furthermore, the report comes mere days before the U.S. midterms election, with Trellix and the FBI reporting that election workers and election officials are being targeted with phishing campaigns to install malware and steal credentials. So, once again, we got to do a better job. Government exposed to old Android phones, and still part of that is still old iOS, but it seems like Android has way more vulnerabilities. So let's be safe out there, government. Professor Black Ops, please subscribe. Come on, government, get it together.